let's keep each other safe. It's going to take 4 to 5 months for this to get out. So we'll get this show on the road. Thank you, attendees, for coming, and please ask questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll try and deal with that. Okay, let's start. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your weekly update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today we will speak with the executive team of Room to Read, a global nonprofit focused on educating children and particularly on access to education for girls. Our guests are Geetha Murali, Room to Read's Chief Executive Officer, Heather Simpson, the Chief Program Officer of Room to Read, and Shari Freedman, the Chief Financial Officer. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take 3 snap polls during the show and we'll announce results. And questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you all for joining us. It's wonderful to have you. It's wonderful to talk about Room to Read and a room, not only a room to read, but also room to learn to read, to have the space to actually, and the support to actually learn to read. Geetha, could you talk about the mission? And particularly, let's also focus on the whole idea of equal access to education of girls and boys, because it is such an important topic. And you have a $60 million budget. You try to push out this mission. Talk about your founding and where you are today.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks so much for having us. Well, Room to Read is a global organization focused on creating a world free from illiteracy and gender inequality through education. We envision a world where every child can be fulfilled and have the necessary skills to contribute solutions to the world's most pressing challenges in their families, in their communities, and in the world. Room to Read was founded in 2000 with the initial objective of providing books to children without access. Our founders embarked on a journey from launching a bootstrap startup to eventually capturing the imaginations of investors like Bill Draper and Don Valentine, Jeff Skoll. From there, Room to Read just evolved into this global organization that we are today, with a bold goal of solving children's illiteracy in our lifetimes and giving children, especially girls, the right to quality education, no matter where they're born or to whom they happen to be born. Through our literacy portfolio, we support children to become independent readers, lifelong learners. We train and coach teachers, create quality books and curricular materials, establish libraries filled with children's books in local languages that can be enjoyed at school or at home. And we partner with local communities, governments, and the publishing industry to implement models that help children succeed in school and develop a love of reading. With our girls' education work, we ensure that girls build the skills they need to succeed in school and to make key life decisions. We prepare girls to make positive change by providing life skills curriculum, opportunities for mentorship and peer support. We work with their families and communities on a day-to-day basis to help solve the challenges that girls may be facing to continue through school. But the work goes further by supporting young people of all genders to build the knowledge and skills they need to create a gender equal world. But I think the most important piece is that our programs work. Children 2 to 3 times faster on our programs than their peers. When we survey young women who've graduated from our program, graduates 5 years removed from programming, 93% are either enrolled in further education or have found employment. To give you a sense of breadth, our programs have benefited almost 20 million children across 16 countries and 37,000 communities, and we aim to benefit 40 million children by 2025. And while our work started in Asia and grew to several countries across Asia and Africa, we've now launched projects in the Middle East, Latin America, and the United States, with a view to share our expertise wherever we can further our mission.
Now, Heather, when you look at the programs, one of the things that I find to be so interesting is that every country, every culture has its own version of a caste system. Sometimes they're called caste systems. Sometimes it's based in race. Sometimes it's based in stature. Sometimes it's based in gender. Isn't this whole idea of providing an equal educational opportunity, isn't it also a reality that these kinds of activities challenge embedded inequities in all of our societies, and no society is exempt, right? In the United States, we have an inequality. And as soon as we educate people, it shifts. That inequality is part of what you're doing, trying to challenge this notion that people are constantly advantaged or disadvantaged based in education. And you're just trying to give people the ability to thrive within the context in which they live.
Room to Read recognizes that education is a fundamental human right, and that every child, no matter where they were born, who their family is, what their caste, what their economic situation is at the current time being, that it is their right to learn. And Room to Read focuses on that fundamental human right, and across the board with ministries of education, with family members, with leaders, they recognize the power of education. And we work in partnership with these ministries, with these community members, to make sure the supports we're doing to support literacy acquisition, life skills development is done in a culturally sensitive way, is done in a gender sensitive way. And so we're opening those doors rather than shutting the doors. If we approached this differently and didn't recognize cultural differences, cultural nuances, we might hit a lot of roadblocks in that process. But Room to Read, we have most of our staff members are from local communities, from the countries in which we're working. And that makes all the difference in making sure we're approaching education in a really sensitive way. Yes, it's challenging, the hierarchy and sometimes power dynamics. We absolutely are committed to this fundamental right that every child deserves the right to learn.
So it's not a neo-colonialist approach. It's basically an approach in which you're coming in with an understanding of the culture. And if you don't have that understanding, you try to acquire that understanding as you also try to deliver on your mission to create an educated populace, basically giving everybody the tools required to thrive, right?
That's right. So it's a science-based approach. We are looking at the brain research of how children develop their literacy skills, how they develop their life skills from a scientific perspective. And we're marrying that with the cultural sensitivities that we know we must approach these interventions with.
Now, with this type of a effort, there's considerable expense and there's considerable management of resources, because a dollar cannot be spent twice for two different purposes. Shari, could you talk a little bit about how you manage the funding to ensure that every dollar has resonance for its purpose?
Well, I love that you said that every dollar can't be spent twice. I'm sure if there were a way, Room to Read would have found a way to do it already. But we're incredibly proud of the way that we manage our funds. We're obsessed with efficiency and effectiveness of taking our donors' money, which we consider to be incredibly one of our most precious resources, and how we utilize it and deploy it is really important. We spend roughly 85 cents on every dollar in pursuit of delivering programmatic.
So 85 cents of every dollar goes directly to the front line. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That's correct. It goes to delivering our programs. And that's a really important metric that has been in our DNA from the very beginning. As Geetha said, right from the start, we founded with this sense of how we would build an organization. And over the years, we've invested in our people and processes and infrastructure that allow us to continuously scale, but also how we think about our return on mission and how we think about taking a dollar and maximizing the way that it will equal the number of children that we could potentially impact. And so we look at things all the time on ways to streamline our processes, improve the way that we deliver our programs and the way that we deliver outcomes so that we can touch and reach more children every year. And so if you look at the last 5 years, for example, our strategic plan from 2015 to 2019, we invested, I don't know, I think it was $250 million, something like $250 million of our resources and program expense, and we impacted 9 million children. In this current strategic plan, we'll invest about $350 million and we'll be impacting 20 million children. So it's a 45% increase in just how efficient we are at delivering our programs and using our donors' money to impact children.
Now, I'm really interested, Geetha, in terms of how you shape the organization, because it's very complicated to shape an organization that has to work across different cultures. I mean, that is such a challenging thing, right? Because you've got sort of the competencies that Shari was talking about. These are technical competencies, or Heather's competencies in terms of developing consistent offerings that can then be scaled. But then you also have boots on the ground, you have partners. How do you see the challenge of creating that organization that has the right balance between sort of centralized efficiencies, but then also an ear to the local concerns of how one should operate within country?
It's a great question. The way that we've built this organization, the types of leadership that we recognize and grow are critical to our ability to deliver. So if you look at our leadership team, it's a combination of our management team, 3 of us are here today, but it also includes our regional directors and our country directors. And when we talk about any shifts in our strategic direction, when we talk about the initiatives that we'll be investing large dollars in, it is a collaborative effort to talk through where the greatest needs are around the world and where we can add the most value. When we made the shift from simply delivering programs that were sort of a demonstration model to really show the quality of the programming, that was a collective effort. And as we made that transition into an organization that's now delivering systemic change, working with governments at scale in the way that Shari just described, that's also a collaborative effort. It requires us having centralized systems that support our global portfolio, but it also allows for a certain nuance in the way that we produce local contextual materials, in the way that we engage with governments, in the ways that we sign agreements, the types of things we will and will not do. And that is something that our country leadership works with us on an annual basis to identify those priorities and deliver upon them.
We just asked a poll, we just completed a poll in which 27 people voted. We asked whether it's important that America invest in educating children who live in low-income communities outside of the US. 93% believed yes. We'll see how the next poll go. It's the two are in juxtaposition with each other. I'll also remind attendees that you can ask questions. We'll try to bring them here. One of the things you said, Geetha, there are things that you won't do that you're sometimes asked to do. What kind of things are they? And Heather, take this, or Geetha, you can take it. What kind of things are you asked to do that are just not consistent with your missions?
Yeah, I'll start and maybe Heather jump in. You know, we are laser focused on our mission, and that is a focus on early grade literacy and secondary school education for girls, and a focus on gender equality in that regard. Outside of that, we will say no to just about anything our way. And I think as we've evolved as an organization, there is the tendency to believe that we have the resources to do all kinds of different things, be it bleed into healthcare or environmental issues or you name it, right? We will take on certain thematic areas, but only through the context of our books, in the way that we produce children's books. For example, we now are producing a series on the impact of COVID for children around the world. We're producing a series around peace and equality, again, for early grade readers. So we do try to find ways to make our content relevant and help children learn how to read, or help girls identify the challenges in their own lives and address them. But outside of that, we will not take on other things. And I think that's what has allowed us to scale to the level that we have. It's allowed us to build an organization with the technical expertise and operational expertise needed to deliver. And truly on an annual planning cycle, you'll see us ask ourselves, how many things can we actually take off the plate? Because we're always asked to do a lot, and there's a lot of opportunity to do good in the world. but our ability to deliver and be efficient is a function of our ability to say no.
So it's really focus. And that really comes back to Shari, your point about 85%, right? As soon as you lose focus, you start having to redesign, invest in more infrastructure and so on, and you can't really continue to hit that kind of distribution of resource so that 85% really goes to the front line, right, Shari?
That's right. I mean, I think that the best organizations in the world are committed to focusing their resources on the most important parts of the business. And that's how we spend our resources. We are innovative, we test new things. We definitely test new things and we try new things, but we hone what works. And we continuously talk among our leadership team on trying new things, but also getting rid of things that don't work. And we have over the years been very, I think in our early years, we had a computer room, a computer lab. We've done all sorts of things that as it turns out, doesn't necessarily add to the literacy, component of children learning to read or girls staying in school. And I think as we've evolved, we've learned, and we really pride ourselves on being a learning organization. And so we continue to learn and grow as a team.
We just completed the second poll, which is really about whether it's important that U.S. investors invest in gender equality education. And we had a similar result in investing to education and children. So it seems that there's a huge amount of alignment between investing in children and the way to invest, which is ensuring that all children have equal access. So Heather, as you hire people for your programs outside of the US, could you talk a little bit about how that actually functions? Because you're dealing with a lot of different languages. It's very difficult to manage remotely. And no matter how culturally astute you are, there are cultures that you won't know, this group here won't know, even your members of your team won't know. How do you navigate that whole issue of bringing people on who will be effective locally, retaining them, making sure that information flows as required for efficient operations, so that Shari's statement of resources and resource distribution is really honored? How does that all work?
As Geetha mentioned, our leadership structure includes our country directors, our regional directors. And so for most of our operating programs, it's happening in countries of operation.
So the country directors are hiring their operating unit. So your challenge is finding somebody who really understands the education landscape within that country, right?
That's correct. And we include that in our hiring criteria. We have our interview process, et cetera. And then we also have a team that I supervise of technical experts who provide technical assistance across our whole portfolio, across all the countries. And about 1/3 of those people live and work in the United States and travel and right now do a lot of Zoom calls. And about 2/3 of them are living in Asia and Africa as well. And so we're hiring local experts who are steeped in knowledge and also understand the cultural nuances, as you say. And we have this global team that is providing learning across the different parts of the Room to Read organization.
And Geetha, could you talk about impact? So you have these team members, you have the local organizations, but really the rubber hits the road when a girl is sitting in classroom. How many people are affected? And if you could break down a little bit by age group and the kinds of education you provide, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning, we, by the end of this year, will have benefited 20 million children through our programs. The vast majority are through our literacy interventions, largely because government systems were already really focused on ensuring that children learned how to read, and it was a part of the education system. We are in many places still fighting an uphill battle when we talk about the importance of girls being educated and continuing through school. And governments to varying degrees accept that as a part of their system versus not. So we're continuing to work on building programs that will allow for system level change on the literacy front, continuing to accelerate that work, but also to shed a light on the importance of life skills education for girls specifically, so that they can address gender specific challenges that they may be facing. We do have a set of what we call global indicators that we measure from all of our project sites on an annual basis. These are things like fluency of children who are reading on our programs, things like the competency girls have in various life skills, to make sure that the ultimate impact on learning and life outcomes is what we envision it to be. And as both Heather and Shari were indicating, we're very focused on being a learning organization. So we look at how our programs are doing on an annual basis, where they may be struggling, where they may need additional supports or different components that might help in terms of addressing these outcomes. And then we'll invest more heavily in those areas to evolve our programming accordingly.
Are there ways in which you can look at the downstream impacts? Because very often education is simply measured by how many hours are in classrooms, or sometimes it's by age group. But it's very difficult sometimes to measure the downstream impacts, either in terms of economic impact, health outcomes, which an educated population is better equipped to take care of their own health needs. There might be other impacts, just happiness, kids being happy, being in school. Do you try to take a cut at that?
Yeah, we're, because we're 20 years old now, we have the advantage of seeing children who have made their way through our program and have established themselves, as adults, giving back to their community. We have many stories. For example, we've just recently been speaking with Dr. Sanjay in Nepal, who was on our literacy program very early in his life and is now a doctor on the front lines fighting COVID. So, we definitely have the individual stories. From a system perspective and a process perspective, we do collect quite a lot of data over time, and we're one of few organizations that collect similar indicator data across so many countries over such a long period of time. And now we're doing quite a lot of work with the graduates of our girls' education program, tracing where they end up 1 year after graduation, 5 years after graduation, looking at things like the type of employment trajectories they take, their age at marriage, their age at motherhood, et cetera. So those sorts of indications will give us a really good sense of the moments, the decision-making moments in a girl's life, and where we can add the most support to ensure that she's able to, as you say, be fulfilled and make the best decisions for herself and her family.
And Heather, has the COVID situation impacted your people on the ground? Because it seems to impact everybody, but we don't seem to report as much about the frontline impacts of providers like educators, particularly on the ground in different countries. How are your people experiencing COVID today?
Absolutely. This has been the biggest education emergency the world has seen in, recent history. Over 90% of every child of school age has been impacted by school closures at some point during this time. So our teams, as soon as school started closing, our teams started reaching out to all the girls in our programming and checking in with them, making sure they were okay, and started providing remote mentoring support to those girls, knowing that adolescent girls especially are extremely vulnerable in these types of humanitarian disasters. They're often the first to get pulled out of school when family's economic situation goes low. They're often the people in a family who are tapped to take care of ill relatives. So we knew these girls were very vulnerable. The longer they're not in a classroom, the more likely they'll never return to that classroom. So we started immediately reprogramming the way we work, and our colleagues in different countries were using phones, they were using text messages to reach out to the girls. On the literacy side too, we knew that children who already were literate were in a much better position to continue learning, even if they weren't able to go to an in-person classroom and see their teacher in person. And so we needed to make sure that those children who were just starting to develop their literacy skills continued on their learning journey. So we started partnering with local radio programs to broadcast literacy instruction over the airwaves, local television stations, national television stations, to also do instruction both on literacy as well as life skills programming for adolescents. And it's taken every person in this organization to really pivot how we think about operating, how we organize ourselves, and how we reach out to those teachers, those parents, and those students in partnership with these ministries of education who do care deeply and want to have their children come back to school when they're reopened and learn during this period. And it's taken a lot of creative problem solving.
And Shari, has the COVID situation affected the internals much? Because you have to keep your people safe, of course. Fundraising becomes very difficult when you can't gather in groups. Everything has to happen by Zoom. There are other challenges. Has it had a big impact, or is it mostly on the front lines?
Oh, no, I think COVID has had an impact on every organization globally. I think there's nobody who's sort of like on the downside and on the upside in this environment. For us, we went right away. I mean, we really did think very quickly about how this was going to impact us financially as well as operationally. I mean, the very first thing we did was make sure that every one of our 1,600 employees was safe and home. And so we locked down our offices around the globe and sent everyone home. We, and we made sure that they had the resources that they could to be able to communicate and do their jobs. I mean, not everybody has great access to internet in some of our field office remote areas where people live, but for the most part, our ability to connect and assure ourselves that we have a staff that's safe and able to work from home. We also recognized that we would not be able to have 5 of our galas, which happen in Asia in the very early part of the year. They started with in March and April, and they fell pretty quickly. We optimistically postponed a few of them, thinking that we would have them in September or October. We just had no idea the impact of how big COVID would be and around the globe. And we rebudgeted right away. I mean, we did a massive rebudgeting across our world in terms of being able to, take expenses that were non-personnel. We made a decision not to impact our personnel expenses. We wanted to hold on to all of our staff through this process. And we made some, what we thought were hard decisions, and some were very easy decisions. The reality was we simply couldn't travel. We couldn't, there were things we just couldn't do. And so they came off the table pretty quickly. We're learning to rebudget quickly multiple times. We've done several rebudgeting processes during the course of the year. And our board of directors, who are some of our biggest donors, but are so engaged, we've been meeting with them on a monthly basis. We normally meet 3 times a year. We've been checking in on a monthly basis to make sure that we have the resources we need and they're matched with the way that we're spending money. And we've been challenged to redeploy resources where we would normally be on the ground in certain countries spending money. We are using them to actually make advances on things like our literacy cloud, so that we can be delivering our children's books in various languages to ministries of education and others who can actually tap into those platforms. So we're redeploying the resources actively during the course of the year, and we're spending a lot of time thinking about how we can best get the most out of the resources we have.
It's really an all-in effort, isn't it, Geetha?
Absolutely. It's the entire organization end to end had to redesign and redeploy very quickly. And the level of flexibility that we've had to demonstrate in order to ensure we could meet children wherever they are through whatever mediums they had available to them. That's what we're here for. That's our mission, and we've let that guide us.
So we just completed a really interesting poll in which we tried to restrict people to selecting one of three answers on the best way to educate children in low-income communities. And what was interesting to me is that it's still tilted toward technology. Heather, if you could comment, and then I'm going to give Geetha the last word, could you comment a little bit on how important tech is versus in-person learning, mentoring, other aspects that are not technically driven to your mission?
So I have a 10-year-old son who's in the room next door online learning, and I hear tears every once in a while. So even under the best of circumstances, this pivot to emergency use of online learning and tech is challenging. It's very difficult. And when we look at the children that Room to Read is supporting, many of them have no computer at home, no access to internet. Many of them have never touched a phone, even if someone in their family owns a phone. So we can't just rely on tech. And that's why the whole organization has identified a range of no tech, low tech, and high tech solutions to try to meet these children where they are. And really, a hard copy book is an incredibly powerful use of technology, appropriate technology for most of the children that Room to Read is serving. So it did take us a little while to figure out how to get hard copy materials out to children. But in the first few months, we were able to figure out some of those supply chains. And it's incredibly powerful to see children reading books, listening to radio stations, in some cases where they do have family members with cell phones, reading on cell phones, in addition to those hard copy materials, have been really important. And this goes for the adolescents as well. Getting life skills workbooks out to the girls in our program has been a really important solution to helping learning continuity during this time.
Plus, you can drop a book, you can share a book, you can gift it, you can have it back, you can reread it, right? I mean, the technology is amazing. I mean, you can't drop one of these.
Absolutely.
Right?
When the lights go out, even in California, and you can't recharge, those books are still there when the sun's up.
So Geetha, what's the future of the organization and this effort? How are you going to evolve this and continue to scale it? Because as pervasive as your programs are in different countries, they really are literally just scratching the surface of a great need, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Mark, this is the reason that Room to Read transitioned as part of this current strategic plan from demonstration to expansion model, as we call it, system level interventions. And, you know, really, as your last question asked, I mean, technology is a means, it's a tool, but ultimately we want scale. And our focus is on strengthening systems for the long term. There are too many project-based interventions that are focused on short-term results instead of long-term and sustained impact. So that's why some of what Room to Read is doing is working with teacher colleges to provide exemplary teacher training and coaching so teachers can deliver lesson plans at scale, supply and demand chains for learning materials, family and community engagement to impact the culture of reading in communities. These are the types of investments that make systems stronger. And they enable systems to support children effectively for the long term. And there have been a lot of questions in this polls about, you know, which children do we work with? Where do we invest? Ultimately, education is the one thing that you can't take away. It impacts health, economics, peace. It impacts individuals' income, childhood mortality, the probability of armed conflict. I mean, we are interconnected. And Room to Read is therefore focused on ensuring every child, no matter where they're born, has access to quality education, which is why I also mentioned projects that we're now looking at in the United States, where 1 in 6 children are living in poverty. So inequity can happen anywhere. It is a fact, and that's what makes our mission all the more relevant today.
Such an important point that the mission is relevant across societies, that it can be pursued with respect to in-country sensibilities and cultures, that the team that you build can have a balance of different knowledges, the the cultural sensitivity, the crisp knowledge required to manage finance or fundraising or program delivery. Thank you all for coming and explaining the mission of Room to Read. Geetha Murali, Heather Simpson, and Shari Freedman, and the entire group. Thank you so much for advancing literacy in the United States and overall in the world. And thank you so much for your insights. That's the Nonprofit Report. Stay safe, everyone. Let's mask up, and we'll see you on Thursday. Take care.
Thank you.